just have to explain that you've given me 1 hour to present about 5 hours worth of material. And it's not a joke because I've just come off of finishing up a brand new book on biblical genealogy. This is a mock-up of the cover. It's not going to be the final cover because we have to replace the pear. I'm suggesting a quince, which was the medieval forbidden fruit, not an apple. That's the modern one. But my graphic artist came up with this concept of a half-bitten fruit inside a crown of thorns, and I loved it. So the book is going to be called First Adam to Last Adam. Look for it at probably not by Christmas. That was my goal, but first of the year is where we're shooting for. We're almost done laying it out, but then lots of proofreading has to happen after that. But the topic for tonight is something that a lot of people don't like. How many of you have had a read through the Bible in a year plan and you gave up when you got to the list of the begats? All right, so you only made it to Genesis chapter 5, not so good. Well, maybe you went through Leviticus, maybe you went through Numbers, and maybe you got all the way to 2 Chronicles. And more lists of disconnected names that don't seem to have any basis in anything important. And yet, the biblical authors thought they were important enough to keep them. Some of them literally don't have any connection to anything else. Someone found a list of names and wrote them down. They're in our Bible, and we don't know how they connect. Other ones, though, tell us about like the genealogy of Jesus Christ. So there's some very important name lists and then some incidental ones. But there are several things that studying biblical genealogy does do for us. One, it allows us to build a timeline of Earth's history. That would be the first part of my talk. It also, maybe the second part of my talk, it helps us to explain ethnography and the origin of the so-called races easily with no evolution. It gives us the lineage of Jesus. It gives us a deeper insight into a lot of Bible stories. All these little Bible stories that you probably heard or read once, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, for instance, I got to be careful with my rabbit trails here. This becomes a very long talk. But you know the story of Jael, who drove the tent peg through Sisera's head. Who was she married to? A Kenite. What? A descendant of Jethro, Moses' father-in-law. He and the family came with the Israelites when they went into the promised land. And the Bible says, and they live amongst us to this day. Oh, wow, that's just a little thing. Oh, that helps put everything in context. There's thousands of things like that. But the best thing about biblical genealogy, because there's hours of fun struggling to pronounce very odd names. Now, a lot of what you're going to see will or already has appeared in Creation Magazine. I've got a long article on the last section of this talk in the Journal of Creation. So I'll be reviewing that for you tonight. All this information is going to be coming out. We also have some YouTube videos on this subject. I filmed one, again, on the last section of this talk. It's on YouTube. It's very well received. Lots of information on creation.com. I'm going through this fast on purpose, just because most of you know this already. A lot of you already have our magazine. A lot of you are already on our newsletter. Now, if you don't get our weekly newsletter, I have a clipboard right there. I can see them right there. As you leave, just grab one of those, put down your name, your email address, and your zip code, and be plugged into the information stream that CMI is constantly producing. And we are constantly producing new information. We call ourselves an information ministry. Our job, my job literally, is to take information, put it down into an understandable format, and give it to other people to encourage them. I'm not just challenging the evolutionists, I'm encouraging Christians too. And I do that on purpose because I remember when I was young and I had none of these answers, I was struggling under the weight of evolutionary theory, and this creation message freed me. So, putting that out there. Okay. If we're going to study lists of names, if I just started rattling them off, you'd all just wither and die. So we're not going to do that. Instead, let me explain to you how the names are packaged. There's actually two different types of name lists in the Bible. One is a descendant tree, which is forward-looking in time and very complicated and hard to get. The other is an ancestor tree, which looks backwards in time and is really simple. And because most biblical genealogy is only focused on the male lineage, what we find is family sticks, father to son to son to son to son to son to son. Easy. The first one, though, descendant trees, those are tough. For example, You've probably read through Genesis 10 and Genesis chapter 11. Chapter 10 is called the Table of Nations. It's a story of the nations spreading out on the earth from Noah and Shem, Ham, and Japheth after the flood. This took me hours to put this onto a PowerPoint slide. Because you never know how many people are going to be in the next generation. And then you get cousins and this and that, and that took a long time. And after having this for a couple of years, I realized there's another way to display the data. Because see, data display and how you package information is really important for the human brain. Same information. Does that look different to you? Does that tell you different types of information? Yeah, first of all, I'm looking at this. I don't think this is complete. It does not look like every single descendant of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, even to the second generation, is listed. Not only that, when you look at this, there's Noah, there's Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and a ring of names, of sons, but then the next ring, most of these are not names. They're people groups. The ites and the eames. And I don't know that this person here is a son of that person. I just know this people group derived from this other person. Oh. And then when you start looking at it geographically, you realize that the furthest west this gets is the island of Crete, which was settled by descendants of Ham. And Crete is right next to Greece, which the Bible doesn't talk about here. But if Ham settled Crete, it's easy to get to Greece. And once you're in Greece, you're on Europe. So who settled Europe first? Oh. And even in Africa, almost none of Africa is talked about. Northern Africa, Put, which is south of Egypt, Egypt itself, and then, you remember the Benghazi story? I don't want to talk about politics, but remember Benghazi? When you look at Libya, there's the Bight on the top there. Well, you have Tripoli on one side and Benghazi on the other side. That's the ancient capital of a place called Cyrenaica. Simon of Cyrene, who carried Jesus' cross, was from Cyrenaica. And that's the farthest west the Bible talks about. So who settled Africa? I don't know. Who settled Europe or Asia? And farthest east, it gets to about Elam. The Elamites settled in western Iran. Doesn't even talk about India. So, let me ask you a question. When was that written? If it was written right after the Tower of Babel, which comes right after the Tower of Babel account, if it was written right after the Tower of Babel, it's a description of the people known to someone, maybe Shem or something like that, but only out to a couple hundred miles. There might be other people groups that aren't described. But if this is describing, everyone that he knew about, there's been thousands of years of history since then. Therefore, I don't expect that to reflect modern genetics because of invasions, wars, plagues, and we know people have moved a lot. And people also trade, and when you have a guy in a ship going to another city to trade, what does he do overnight? Yeah, those activities tend to leave babies behind. And so you get lots of blending of things. But let's say this is written later. Let's say this is written like in Moses' time. What is it? It's a description of the nations known at that time, mostly Arabian tribes, Arabian and Canaanite tribes, and a couple people outside of that, which means it's not a reflection of all world history, which means it's also not a reflection of genetics. Hey, you're learning stuff? Is this too much? Because I'm going to be rapid fire like this for the next 45 minutes. Here's another descendant tree. Now, this is not straight up in one place. You have to pull lots and lots of different places in the Bible to put this together. But you can make very detailed family trees. This is a family tree of Terah, the father of Abraham, the father of Isaac, the father of Jacob, the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. Look at all the inbreeding. Abraham married his sister, half-sister, different mothers, same father. When they gave birth to Isaac, that was equivalent to giving birth to their brother. Then Isaac married his first cousin once removed and first cousin twice removed times 2, Rebekah, who was like marrying a sister. And when they had Jacob, he married his first cousin Rachel and his first cousin Leah, but they're much closer than first cousins because they all descend from the same ancestor in multiple different lines. You know how you get half your DNA from each one of your parents? So you're 50% mom, 50% dad. That means you're 1/4 of each of your 4 grandparents. You're 25. You're 12.5% of your great grandparents, then 6.25%, then 3 and a little bit, and you're about 1.5%. If you take the longest line here, these brothers should have about 1.5% of Tara's DNA. But because they inherited it under multiple different lines, they've actually got about 22%. And because of the laws of genetics, a lot of that, probably about half of that, will be in identical copies. So if there's a gene that affects skin color or height or the shape of the nose or the curliness of the hair, or is a high probability that all the brothers have 2 identical copies of it. So you could be walking down the street of some ancient village and just pick out an Israelite because they'll look different because of inbreeding. In fact, I wrote an article in Journal of Creation, Inbreeding, the Origin of Races. This is my recipe of how the so-called races arose after the flood. Not before Babel, because everyone was mixing. I expect everyone was mixing. But when God separated the nations into little groups and spread them out across the planet, what happens? Each little group starts inbreeding with only themselves, and you lose a lot of genetic diversity. And as long as those factors that affect the way people look are in that initial population, they're going to be randomly distributed. Boop, 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 boop. You're going to get different skin colors, hair colors, sizes, and shapes of people because of inbreeding. You don't need evolution. Long story, you look up my article. Okay. That's the first type, the descendant tree, which is really complicated. Would you like to see an easy ancestor tree? Okay, here's 2. Genesis chapter 5, you're probably familiar with. Starts with Adam, because Abel gets killed by Cain, but Adam has Seth when he's 130 years old. There's 10 generations of men that end up with Noah, who has 3 sons. But have you ever noticed that Genesis chapter 4 has the same pattern? But this time, through Cain's lineage, through several men and 3 sons, Jabal, Jubal, and Tubal-Cain. Now it also happens that 3 women are mentioned, which is very strange. Why is Cain's line preserved in the Bible? Someone a couple weeks ago said, because it's important. I said, yes, exactly, it's important. But of the possible millions of descendants of Cain, why that one line? And only one line. These are retrospective. Noah never knew Adam. Adam could not have built a family tree down to Noah, and he wouldn't have known it. Right? All of his descendants, hey, I'm going to make a family tree to that guy over there. Why would he do that? No, this is Noah building his family tree going backwards to Adam. This is probably Lamech, because Noah with 3 sons, Lamech going backwards to Cain. Why is it there? Okay, wild card. Can't know if it's true. But what if Naamah is Noah's wife? Notice that there's nothing in Scripture that says you're not allowed, the descendants of Seth are not allowed to marry the descendants of Cain. It's not there. And these people are as equally wicked as these people. Because when Noah was younger and God's only found one righteous person alive, well, his father and grandfather were still alive. They're not righteous. Oh, and you'll notice that the name of God appears in several of these other names over here. Just putting that out there. We can't know, but it sure is fun to, when you start asking those questions, like, what on earth? And then you just got to move on because you can't answer the question. But looking at Genesis 5 specifically, we're told how old each of these men are when the next generation is born, which means you can build a chronology from Adam to Noah. And then Genesis 11, you can go from Noah to Abraham and a couple more generations after that. And if you put that together, you get, in blue, ignore the gray and the red for a moment, the blue line, those are the numbers given to you in your English Bibles. That comes from the Hebrew Masoretic text. That's the basis of all of our modern English translations. In gray, those are the numbers you get if you use the Greek Septuagint. There's, for some reason, in general, most of these generations, the man is 100 years older when the son is born. And so you get about 1,600 extra years of Earth's history. Now, I know there are a lot of Septuagint advocates amongst even conservative Christians. I am not. I was willing to be persuaded after years of study, and I published 6 really long articles in Journal of Creation, creation.com. I unpersuaded myself. It becomes an impossible conspiracy, and you can look up, just type in LXX on creation.com in the search box, and some of those articles will come right up. But I'm just putting it out there. There's another type of numbers in the Bible, in a different Bible. In red, now the blue is on top, so these things are underneath. But in red, those are the numbers you get if you follow the Samaritan Pentateuch. The Samaritans have their own Bible. You know, the Good Samaritan, the woman at the well, you know, the Samaritans have their own Bible, their own first 5 books, but they changed it. And this obviously changed. They moved the temple to Mount Samaria and things like that. But they have their own. The numbers in the beginning are exactly the same as the Masoretic and a little bit of hiccups in there, and then at the end they're exactly the same as the Septuagint. But the end result is that. So pick one, it doesn't matter. If you start with Adam, we now have a chronology that can get you all the way up to Joseph. In fact, we can actually get up to all the way to Moses. But if we want to build a timeline of world history, we have to go backwards. This goes forward. When did Joseph live? Well, we can maybe try to pick something in world history that we know is a fact. We might want to start with maybe like the birth of Christ. Yeah, good luck. I mean, when was he born? Was it 6 BC? Was it 3 BC? Was it 4 BC? All different scholarly opinions. So that doesn't work very well. You might try to take the prophecies of Daniel. Really hard. His prophecy of weeks is easy retrospectively, but starting with Daniel going forward, not very easy, especially because you don't know exactly when he made the prophecy. Worse, in the Bible, there's what the scholars call 400 silent years between the close of the Old Testament and John the Baptist. 400 years of no prophecy. Now, there are some kind of historical books, like the Maccabees, those books, but they're not accurate. They're not good history. There's errors in there, so no one trusts them. But there is a date that we can peg onto the timeline. And that is very well attested in the Bible and very well attested in archaeological history. It's a date that the Babylonians destroyed the temple. That has been dated at 586 BC. And that's our starting point. Now before that we have the time of the kings of Judah and Israel. If you ever try to work through that, you can kind of get there. But it's hard because they're 2 different kingdoms. And this king died in the 3rd year of this other king. Well, the problem was that the 2 kingdoms don't look like they're counting years the same. You know that there are 2 different New Years in the Hebrew calendar? Passover and Rosh Hashanah. One's in the spring, one's in the fall. It looks like the kings they were actually having their New Years were different. And there's a question of, when I'm in my first year, is that year 0 or year 1? And they might have been doing it differently also. But scholars have poured through this for decades, centuries. They finally work it out, and a really hard number most people agree with is that Solomon built the temple in 966 BC. Now before that we have the period of the Judges. Very hard again. First of all, the Judges is not chronological. You look at the details, you realize it mentions the name of someone who died wait a minute, it's not chronological. And when you look at their ruling times, if you add it all up, you have too much time. So it looks like, one was ruling in the north and there was a big problem and he fixed it, and then some problems happened in the south while the other one was still alive. So it's really hard, except we can skip right over that with 1 Kings chapter 6. In the 480th year after the people of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the 2nd month, he began to build the house of the Lord. Okay, so if he started building at 966, well, subtract 480 years, and all of a sudden we have a date for the Exodus of 1446 BC. Cool. Now, CMI, we have done a lot of work on the timing of the Exodus and the time that the Israelites spent in Israel. If you just go, spent in Egypt, I mean. If you go to creation.com, type in Egypt, you get a lot of really cool things. We think we've identified the Pharaoh of the Exodus even, and put Joseph into an archaeological context that makes lots of sense scripturally. And if you would like, we still have a couple of open slots on this year's Egypt tour.
Go.
Was it good?
Go.
Okay, that's what he said, go. We've taken so far almost 500 people on 5 different trips. And we're doing trip 6 in February, which is booked, but there's still a couple slots on our March trip. So come on, it'll be a lot of fun. Okay, so 1446 BC is the Exodus. And then before that, we have a big debate. How long were the Israelites in Egypt? That's called the Egyptian sojourn. How long were they there? Well, you read Exodus 12, it sure sounds pretty obvious, right? The time the people of Israel lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of 430 years, on that very day, the house of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. So I just took that as a matter of fact. Okay, duh, it's 430 years. Why, though, do most even conservative scholars not agree? Ouch. And over time, I realized like my first crack in the wall actually was a study of genealogy. Because I took all these genealogies that went through the time of in Egypt. So here we have people born in Canaan, people that lived in Egypt, people that were at the Exodus, and then later on. And I realized that all of these things span that gap with no conflicts and no ambiguities. And the branches intermarry a couple of times. If there was missing generations, there would be an error here. There would be a conflict somehow. If you're skipping generations, you couldn't do that. So I started saying to myself, maybe it really is a short sojourn like so many scholars believe. Or do it this way. This is a timeline. Here's a 430-year span. The conquest of Canaan, here's the Exodus in 1446. So 430 years earlier, they would have gotten into Egypt in 1876 BC. Simple. Well, we know that Jacob was born before he got to Egypt, and we know how old he was when he got to Egypt. We know how old Joseph was when he died, and you can calculate all these things. You can figure out how old he was when he went to Egypt. We know when Levi died. Levi was born before Jacob. We know that Kohath, Levi's son, was born before they got to Egypt. On the other end, we know that Moses is 80 years old when he left, and he lived for 120 years. And we know that his father was Amram, and his mother was Jochebed, the daughter of Levi. Now, see what I've done here? I've stretched these out as much as possible. I mean, Jochebed's born when Levi dies. Amram's born the year Kohath dies. Kohath is born the year they got to Egypt. And even stretching as much as possible, you cannot span 430 years. It's a classic area where people appeal to missing generations. But what happens if it's not 430 years? It all works out beautifully with no strain at all. In fact, you can slide these names left and right and still have room. In fact, God told Abraham they're going to come out in the 4th generation. Moses, Amram, Kohath. Oh. Just saying. Now, I don't know. Pick one. It doesn't matter. We can get our Exodus in 1446, the entry into Egypt in 1661, or add 215 years. Fine. But we want to get to creation. How do we do that? Well, we take the nameless in what's called the patriarchal era between Noah and Abraham, and we get a flood year. And then from Genesis 5, we get what's called the antediluvian. That's before the flood, antediluvian. And we get a date of creation of 4004 BC, which is absolutely wrong. Almost certainly can't be true. It was very convenient for Archbishop Usher, who calculated this, notice, using a short sojourn in the 1600s to get 4004 BC, because he believed, using eschatology, that all of Earth's history is going to unfold in 7 1,000-year periods. And since he thought that Christ was born in 4 BC, well, of course, the creation is 4004 BC. Very convenient. But consider, Seth. Seth is born when Noah is 130 years old. Was he born on Adam's birthday? Almost certainly not. Yeah, okay, 1 out of 365, but the chance is really low. It's less than 1%. Therefore, he's born sometime during that year. So every time you have one of those generations listed, it's on average plus 6 months. So by the time you get to Abraham, which 20 generations after Adam, you added about 10 years. And then there's questions about what calendar system Adam used, or Noah used. And all sorts of other things, like why do most of the numbers in Genesis 5 and 11 end in a 0 or a 5? Why don't they like number 6, 5, 1, or 6, 1, 2, 3, 7, or 8, or 9? Most of the numbers end in a 0 or a 5. What's going on with that? If you go to my article, The Biblical Minimum Maximum Age of the Earth, we discuss all sorts of weird things about those numbers and answer why they might look like that. So that was a fun study. Well, I'm trying to say, how old can the earth be biblically? What's the maximum? What if I stretch everything out using the Masoretic or the Septuagint and the long sojourn, and I could not even get it to 6,000 BC. That's it. So, but now that we have a rough sketch of Earth's history, this is fun because all the numbers round off really nicely. Creation was about 4,000 BC. Abraham literally lived about 2,000 BC. Moses lived 1,500 BC. David lived, his lifespan covered 1,000 BC. This is really nice, round numbers. Jesus, of course, about year 0, and then today is about 2000 AD. Can we fit ancient history onto that? Well, have you heard of the Bronze Age? When was that? How long did it last? Well, a couple hundred years, and it was the time of Moses. Have you heard of the Iron Age? How long was that? When was that? Well, it was a couple hundred years, and it's about the time of David. You ever hear of the Trojan Wars? That's ancient history, right? No, that was the time of the judges. How about the Peloponnesian Wars? Sparta versus Athens. Yeah, time of divided monarchy. Or how about the famous 300 Spartans who defended Greece from the invasion Persians? That was Esther's king, after the Babylonians had destroyed Jerusalem. Oh, so ancient history actually fits in the timeline very nicely. All right, so we just built a timeline of Earth's history using biblical genealogies. Are they important? Yeah, really important. But now I'm going to bring up a massive contradiction in genealogy, and let's see if we can solve this. This is something that Richard Dawkins used in his book, The God Delusion, as primary evidence that the Bible is full of nonsense. If you go to rationalwiki.org, they have an article, prominent article, on a massive problem, and that Jesus has 2 different genealogies. That can't be true. You can't have 2 different fathers. Those genealogies are given to us in Matthew chapter 1 and Luke chapter 3. In Matthew starts with Abraham, goes to King David, and goes through David's son. Starts with Abraham. It starts with Abraham, goes to David, goes through David's son Solomon. These are all the kings of Judah. And then Shealtiel and Zerubbabel, and then some unknown people, otherwise they're only in Matthew. We don't have no other record of these names except in Matthew, to Joseph, the adoptive father of Jesus. Now Luke starts with Adam, goes through the same list of people to David, but then goes to one of his other sons, Nathan. The sons of Nathan, by the way, are discussed at the time of the Babylonian captivity. We know they were still around. Goes through all these names to Shealtiel and Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel is the first governor of Judah when they come back from Babylon. Very important figure. But then another list of people that ends up with Joseph, the adoptive father of Jesus. Now Mary is there. Why? I don't believe this, by the way, but why is Mary there? Most evangelicals, when presented with this, say, oh no, the solution's easy. Matthew is tracing Joseph's line, and Luke is tracing Mary's line. Piece of cake, done. If that's true, there's no conflict at all. A couple issues. One, Luke doesn't mention Mary's name. Two, there are no female genealogies anywhere else in the Bible. Three, that's not the most common view in church history. Now, this does go all the way back to Hilary of Poitiers in the 4th century. Had this, he said, we had this conflict. I think it's Mary versus Joseph. Okay. But even earlier than that, like Julius Africanus in the 3rd century and others, says no, they're both Joseph. But one of them is tracing the line of the kings, and the other is just tracing the biology. Line of kings or biology. Are you familiar with British history? Anyone familiar with, like, list of kings, like Queen Elizabeth, who just died, right? You know she wasn't supposed to be the queen, right? Her uncle was the king. But her uncle wanted to get married to a divorced American woman. And British people are up to, you can't do that, no. So he said, fine, I'm not king anymore. Let my brother be the king. She wasn't supposed to be the queen. The current king of England wasn't supposed to be the king of England. Okay. If you didn't know that, and you're studying British history, like maybe 100 years from now, looking at all the kings and queens, oh yeah, okay. And you would not know that it went father, son, brother, daughter. Or how about Queen Elizabeth I? She had no children. Who was the next king or queen of England? The famous King James VI of Scotland and the first of Britain, of England. Wait a minute, James, he was not Elizabeth's son. He was her first cousin twice removed. They both descended from Henry VII, Henry VIII's father. But James is a couple more generations down. So when he became the king, they skipped a couple of generations. And if you didn't know that, you would think there's a biological connection between Elizabeth and James, and it's not true. Anytime a monarch dies without a child, now back then it was without a son, before Henry VIII anyway, they have to search up the family tree and then down the family tree to find someone who could be it. It happened in France famously. There's something called the Capetian miracle. In the 1300s, Margaret of Valois was a princess. 3 of her brothers were French kings, and they all died. There are no French queens. So the French said, well, we got to find a king. They went way up the family tree, way back down, and found this guy named Hugh Capet. I think it was like 8 generations. And Hugh Capet married Margaret of Valois. They now had a king who was descended from this other king. They didn't even know if they had preserved the Y chromosome. It's called the Capetian miracle. Something like 8 generations. I forget the exact number. It's a huge jump. A king list is not biological. Now, if we're going to talk about this, though, we're going to have to focus on that guy, Jeconiah, who had 3 names. In fact, when you read the end of Kings or the end of 2nd Chronicles, it's so confusing. The end of the kingdom of Judah is crazy because there's 4 kings in quick succession. All of them have at least 2 names. 2 of them reign for 3 months, and 2 of them reign for 11 years. And they're not in order. We have King Josiah, the boy king, the last good king of Judah. He had a son named Johanan. We never hear of him. We have Shallum, who's also named Jehoahaz, who only reigned for 3 months because Josiah went down to fight King Necho, one of the 4 named pharaohs in the Bible. That matches, in fact, Necho was from Cyrenaica. He was a Libyan that had conquered Egypt. And he was going, I think, to assist the Assyrians in their battle with Babylon. Ooh, weird. And he killed King Josiah. And the Israelites or somebody appointed this guy, or maybe he did, and 3 months later he takes him, brings him to Egypt where he dies, and appoints Eliakim, also known as Jehoiakim, as king. He reigns for 11 years. When he dies, his son Jehoiachin, also named Jeconiah, also named Coniah. By the way, these names, if you take the Hebrew letters and reverse them, that's where the names come from. It's like God is good, good is God. It's the same name. And Konai is this Jeconiah without the Yahweh. Oh, okay, it helps a little bit. But then he reigns for 3 months. The Babylonians come, because the Babylonians, they destroyed Assyria. And now the Babylonians reigning the world, the center of the world. They come, grab him. He's 18 years old. They throw him in prison for 37 years. He's 55 years old when he gets out of prison. They appoint his uncle, Mattaniah, also called Zedekiah, who reigns for 11 years. He rebels against Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar comes back. He brings him out of the city, murders all of his children in front of him, and then blinds him. So the last thing he sees is dead kids, and brings him to Babylon where he dies. But Jeconiah didn't die. And yet, Jeremiah has no nice words for Jeconiah. As I live, declares the Lord, though Coniah, right, same name, the son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, or the signet ring on my right hand, yet I would tear you off and give you into the hand of those who seek your life. Wow. Of Zerubbabel, it is said he's like a signet on God's right hand. Ooh, very interesting. Into the hand of those who you are afraid, even into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, into the hand of the Chaldeans. I will hurl you and the mother who bore you into another country where you were not born, and there you shall die. But to the land which they will long to return, they shall not return. Ooh, that's harsh. How about this one? Write this man, this is Jeconiah again, write this man down as childless, a man who shall not succeed in his days, for none of his offspring shall succeed in sitting on a throne of David and ruling again in Judah. That means the Messiah cannot come from him. That means that Matthew has a problem, because Matthew traces him to the Messiah. Now, the Jewish scholars say that he repented. And there are other curses in the Bible where someone repents and God relents and forgives them. We know that. And later on in Jeremiah, it says something like, I just want you all to come back. That's what God says to the Jews. Our God is a forgiving God. Maybe he repented, or maybe he didn't. But he was 18 years old when he became king. He reigned 3 months in Jerusalem, and Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to the city and took him prisoner. Then in the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, that's Jeconiah, in the 12th month, on the 27th day of the month, Evil-Merodach, king of Babylon, that's Nebuchadnezzar's son, in the year that he began to reign, graciously freed Jehoiachin, king of Judah, from prison. And he spoke kindly to him and gave him a seat among the seats of the kings who were with him in Babylon. So Jehoiachin put off his prison garments, and every day of his life he dined regularly at the king's table. And for his allowance, a regular allowance was given him by the king according to his daily needs as long as he lived. Oh, that's so nice. Scholars laugh at this. Oh, sure. Some petty king of a couple of sheep herders in this little town called Jerusalem got elevated to sit next to the king of the world. Come on. We found a record of the ration allowance. I think this is in Susa, not Babylon, one of those two cities, near a stairwell. It mentions Jeconiah's name and the name of his sons and how much his allowance was per day and how much his son's allowance was. The incidental confirmations of biblical history is what shows the Bible is true. And it's little things like that. It's awesome. 2 Kings again, though. This is going back in time. This is the time of Isaiah, about 150-ish years before Jerusalem was destroyed. We have another good king named Hezekiah. This is what Isaiah says to Hezekiah in 2 Kings. Hear the word of the Lord. Behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house and that which your fathers have stored up till this day shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, says the Lord, and some of your own sons who will come from you, whom you will father, shall be taken away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. Now, that did not happen in Hezekiah's time, because the word son can mean descendant. Here it clearly does. But this means that maybe Jeconiah wasn't able to father children. In which case, the family line that we see must have been adoptive. I suspect that this did happen to Daniel, who was a royal prince, and probably Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego also. This is very common practice in ancient kingdoms to find young men who are well educated and of royal stock and do a little snippy operation, and now they're safe around the harem. Just saying. But it could also have occurred to Jeconiah. I don't know that, but it's suggested. Now, let's look at the details of the genealogies. Instead of that curly format, here's a linear format. Of course, Luke starts with Adam, Matthew starts with Abraham, but they both converge at David. Then Matthew goes through Solomon, through a long list of kings. Now notice he skips over 4 names. Nobody knows why. The name David in numerology is 464, DVD, which gives 14. So he has 3 sets of 14 names, kind of. And that's suggested why maybe they did that. Nobody really knows. I mean, Jeconiah's father's not even listed. But then we have Shealtiel and Zerubbabel. Luke goes from David to his brother Nathan, Solomon's brother Nathan, down a long list of people, about the same number of generations, and ends up with Neri, father of Shealtiel, father of Zerubbabel. Shealtiel cannot have 2 fathers. Now, continuing there, here's Shealtiel and Zerubbabel. Matthew's list is much shorter. Luke's list is much longer. Well, Matthew is skipping names, so maybe he skipped a few here. Fine. But then we have Jacob, father of Joseph, in Matthew, and Heli, father of Joseph, in Luke. Not possible. Again, you can't have 2 fathers. Is this an error? Oh, it's worse. Because in 1 Chronicles, we have a man named Pedaiah. It goes Jeconiah, Pedaiah, Zerubbabel. Who's Pedaiah? Don't know. Maybe Shealtiel has 2 different names. A lot of people have 2 different names. Or maybe there's something else going on. I struggled with this for months. I said, there's got to be a better answer than Matthew is tracing Joseph and Luke is tracing Mary. There's got to be something, because I know ancient history, most people didn't believe that, but I couldn't figure it out, and no one had ever written it down. I did find 1 or 2 references later, vague ones. But I said, I want something that is logical and probable. Something happens a lot in families, and something that follows the Old Testament law. And this appeared to me after much, much thought. I know it's ugly. We'll go through it. In blue, those are the names in Matthew. I no longer believe that Matthew is a genealogy. I think Matthew is tracing the rightful king of Judah. And a king list is not a list of father to son relationships, remember? So let's just say, here's Jeconiah. Eunuch or not, let's say he's not a eunuch, right? He's getting married. Because what's the last surviving king going to do when he gets out of prison? He's going to try to have a son, perpetuate that bloodline. That's what kings do. Well, let's say he has a wife and they have a son named Pedaiah. Meanwhile, here's Neri, a descendant of Nathan, a royal prince, who almost certainly only would marry a princess. Almost certainly. So this woman is probably also a descendant of David, probably many times over through all the mixing of the generations. And they maybe have already had a Shealtiel. And then if he died, Jeconiah could easily marry her and just adopt Shealtiel. He's a royal personage. It might be 10, 15 generations, but he's still a prince. Jeconiah is going to try to hedge his bets. Like Henry VIII. I mean, what was it? Died, divorced, however that goes. You know, I mean, he's trying everything he can do to have a son. He finally has Edward, who dies young. Oh well, too bad. And then you got Queen Mary. Okay, but king is going to try to hedge his bets. So I suspect he had more than one wife, and maybe he had a Pedaiah, and he adopted a Shealtiel. But what would happen if Pedaiah died? If he died without a son, according to the Old Testament law, his brother would have to marry the widow. Now, I know that sounds abusive and I know that sounds gross. Ladies, hold on a second. What is the position of a woman in the ancient world who had no son and who's a widow? There's only 2 occupations she can turn to: begging or prostitution. This system prevents that. It means that a younger brother or a brother can't steal all the stuff of the other brother. It means that the land, the money, and all the rights and responsibilities stays with the wife. She controls it. And then when she has a son, she's taken care of. Oh, that's interesting. But if there was what's called a levirate marriage between Shealtiel and the widow, and they gave birth to Zerubbabel, legally and technically, Zerubbabel is Pedaiah's son. And 1 Chronicles, doesn't surprise me, takes the technical route, and it goes Jeconiah, Pedaiah, Zerubbabel. But there's no biological link. Count that man of having no sons. Cool. Don't know it's true. But by the way, I do not know this is true. I'm saying here's a model that happens to work. There might be another solution. I can't think of another solution. But let's say Zerubbabel had more than one son. The older son has the king list. The younger son doesn't. That's Matthew, Luke. So here's the same thing. That's what I just showed you. But here we have Matthew's list, and then we have Luke's list. Have you ever noticed that in Matthew it goes Joseph, Jacob, Mathan, and in Luke it goes Joseph, Heli, Mathat? That's the same name, translated from Aramaic into Greek. It's the same name. That's odd that Joseph has the same name grandfather on two different lines. What if it was the same guy? What if Eleazar died with no sons? They'd go up the family tree and down the family tree to find the next rightful king. In fact, these lines could cross many, many times. Let's say that Abiud had no sons and Risa had two sons. The older one would be listed in Matthew and the younger one could be listed in Luke. It happened twice. It happened there and it happened there that the older one was listed in Luke. And the other times, if there were any more other crosses, this is really fascinating. And then we get to Mathan, father of Jacob, who, what if he had no sons? Well, if his brother Heli was dead, then the right of the kingship would go to his nephew Joseph. And when Joseph adopted Jesus, all of the rights and privileges and responsibilities and authority of the king of Judah fell into the hand of Jesus Christ. And when he appeared before Pilate asked him one direct question. What was that question? Are you the king of the Jews? Why did he ask him that? Because everyone was saying he was. And if church tradition is right, then Salome was Mary's sister, therefore James and John were Jesus' cousins. And they would have known. Did you know there's the king of Hawaii? You didn't know that? Well, he certainly knows it, and the family knows it. You know there's a queen of Denmark today? Do you know that there is a rightful descendant of Napoleon alive today? And a rightful king of France still alive today? Yeah, almost nobody knows it except the family. Herod did not know where the king of Judah was supposed to come from until the Magi told him. So it doesn't mean it's known widely, but it would have been known in Bethlehem. Oh, cool. In fact, if you think about it, I know it's horrible, but Herod may have done Jesus a favor. By killing off all the other boys, he got rid of perhaps several potential claimants to the throne. Also, Joseph has to die before the crucifixion. Because if Joseph was still alive, he'd be the king of the Jews. Oh, man. Fun, isn't it? Man. So all this and more. This is chapter 9 of my book. That table and an explanation, long, detailed study. I love pouring through Scripture and finding things like this. I find my faith is increased. It's just a delight to learn things. I forget a lot of things too, but this is delightful, even though, admittedly, it's hard. But so what? We got brains. God tells us to read. Let's read. Let's learn some of this stuff. But one more subject in passing. The Bible also gives us an answer to the races question, which is a big deal right now in America. Always has been, but it's been bubbling up a lot in the last several years. The answer is quite clear. Within the church, at least, Colossians 3:11, Here there's not Greek and Jew, circumcised and uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave free, but Christ is all and in all. So in Christianity, there are no racial divisions. One might wonder why. Well, how about this one, Isaiah 59? A Redeemer will come to Zion, to those in Jacob who turn from transgression, declares the Lord. What does that mean? That means that there's a person that someone's related to that can step in and take the penalty that the person deserves. The kinsman redeemer. This is Boaz in the book of Ruth. Naomi, there was a famine. She sold her land. She went to a foreign country. She had some sons that died. She came back with a daughter-in-law in tow, a Moabitess of all people. She came back. She had no money. She wanted her land, because once you have land, you can earn money. And so a kinsman named Boaz stepped in, and he paid her debt. He bought the land back. He got Ruth in the process. That was a good deal for him, but it's the idea of a kinsman redeemer. So Christ in the Old Testament is a kinsman, or in the New Testament is a kinsman redeemer of the Old Testament. Problem is, he's not my kin. I'm not Jewish. I have 0% Jewish DNA, according to 23andme.com. How can Christ be my redeemer? How about 1 Corinthians 15:45? Thus it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam became a life-giving spirit. Yes, Christ can be my redeemer because he and I are both descended from Adam. Very important. If we lose Adam, we lose a lot. With the result that now in Christ Jesus, you who once were far off are brought near by the blood of Christ. For he himself is our peace, who has made us both one, has broken down in his flesh a dividing wall of hostility. Man, see, I'm one of those that was far off. Besides the fact my earlier pagan days when I didn't know Christ, my ancestors were all pagans. When I read the history of Northern Europe, I'm talking Germany, the Frisians in the Netherlands, Southern Norway, Ireland, England, these people are evil. They're wicked. They're gross. I read the history of my ancestors. I'm like, these people are from Mars. They would kill me in a heartbeat for nothing, in a horrible way. So Christ has had an amazing change amongst the Europeans where I came from. Thank God for that. But my ancestors knew nothing about the events of the Bible. They were living in darkness and absolute pagan wickedness. And yet, my Jesus sought me out anyway. He became my redeemer anyway because he's my kin. And biblical genealogy tells us that too. So what did we just learn? Biblical genealogy allows us to build a timeline of Earth's history. Yes, it's complicated, fine. But it's there. It explains ethnography, where the races came from. It answers to racism. There actually are no races. And races appear because of inbreeding after the Tower of Babel. It gives us the lineage of Jesus, which is really cool. It gives it a lot of insight into a lot of Bible stories. And of course, we do have lots of fun pronouncing all these horrible names. Now again, a lot of this material is or will be in Creation Magazine. I know a lot of you get Creation Magazine, so I'm not going to do the old, pass the clipboards out like we do a lot, because you've seen my clipboards before, most of you. It comes out 4 times a year, but for a 2-year subscription, we're also going to include Darwin, the Voyage That Shook the World, which is our hour-long documentary on the life of Charles Darwin. Because if you want to understand evolution, you got to understand Darwin. And we just swapped out the DVD. It's now, the title is something like "Why Would God Allow Death and Suffering?" So excellent presentation, brand new, real high-quality presentation in the studio. If you're interested in DNA, I would highly recommend my presentation, Ancient DNA, Illuminating the Tapestry of Biblical Human History. But I know a lot of people don't have DVD players anymore. I don't have any DVDs. We don't pack them anymore because they don't sell anymore. So you can go to creation.com, type on store, and you can watch all of our video content from our store. Just got to get an account on the store, and it's right there. Here's Evolution's Achilles Heels, the book and the DVD. You'll notice that the cover looks slightly different on the table because we just came out with a 10-year anniversary edition, revised and expanded. We rewrote a lot of it because science has advanced and it's only gotten better for our side. especially after the James Webb Space Telescope killed the Big Bang Theory. But read the Big Bang chapter in that book. Here's a simple book, the Creation Answers book, our best-selling book ever. We wrote that to answer 99% of the questions. So we're going to break up in a couple of minutes into a Q&A session. I can almost guarantee you that almost all of your questions have been answered in that book. So grab a copy for yourself or someone else you know. You can also get that online also. Another video, a free one, The Historical Adam, Theological Conundrums and Scientific Implications. This is me. It's basically 7 reasons to believe in the biblical Adam. Some of them logical, some of them genetic, and some of them genealogical. And that was a fun presentation. In fact, I did that for my own YouTube channel, and it was so good. The boss said, nope, that's going to creation.com. I was like, oh, okay, so it's there. And again, if you sign up for our mailing list, you will be notified when this is about to arrive. We told our graphic artist, just go to town, make this the prettiest book you've ever made. And we gave him free rein, and man, his page spreads are just gorgeous. I can't wait to actually have this in my hand. So I'll leave you with this as we break into Q&A or to announcements. 1 Peter 3:15. I would like you to always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you a reason for the hope that's in you. You do it with gentleness and respect. But it's one question at a time. And I just answered Richard Dawkins' silly, ridiculous claim that the Bible has a giant contradiction in it. It doesn't. The genealogies of Jesus stand both true at the same time.